Hello, my name is Don Shule. I'm past commander of the New York Commandery of the Naval Order of the United States. And I'm here today on the 27th of January, 2018, in Manhattan, New York, at the home of 97-year-old Colonel Jonathan Mendes, United States Marine Corps, retired. We're here today to record for posterity his amazing life. Jonathan, let us start at the beginning, as one should do, and tell us where you were born.
I was born here in Manhattan at Lenox Hill Hospital, November 3rd, 1920.
And you attended grammar school here?
No, my parents thought they should raise their 4 children in the country, and we moved to New Rochelle, where I grew up in New Rochelle, where it was woods past our house, and I led an outdoor life in New Rochelle, graduating from New Rochelle High School.
From New Rochelle High School, very good. Moving on to college, I understand you attended Dartmouth, correct?
Yes, and that was because I discovered skiing at age 11, when skiing didn't really exist in this country, and I gradually became pretty good at it. So when it's time for college, there was only one choice, going to Dartmouth, and fortunately I was accepted. But the prep school boys were so good that I didn't even make the freshman ski team.
That's unfortunate. So we find you at Dartmouth. Tell me where you were on December the 7th, 1941.
I was on the 4th floor of my dormitory in my room with my roommate when we heard the news on the radio, and we looked at each other and we knew we were going to war. Very shortly, the Navy started recruiting for naval flight training. I had never thought of it, but I said, well, I can do that too. So I took the Naval I exam and I flunked it, and I went to the Air Force, and I flunked their eye exam. Then I went to the civilian pilot training, and I flunked their eye exam. I went back to the Navy. I flunked their eye exam once more. And the recruiter said, John, get yourself a case of carrot juice and a bottle of vitamin A pills. Take it for a month, and we'll examine you in Boston. I followed that, went to Boston, and I passed. As a result of that, I had a 30-year career in the Marine Corps, flying the best equipment in the world, and fortunately walked away without getting hurt after flying in 2 wars and a couple of 100 missions.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. We find May 4th, 1943. You get your wings, and you began flying SBD Dauntless?
Yes, I went through operational flight training, and actually the planes that I flew were the ones that sank those 4 Japanese carriers in the Battle of Midway, because the fleet got new SBDs and they sent the old ones to the training command.
So I see you arrived in September of 43 in the Pacific, and I understand too, was it for your actions there that you received the Distinguished Flying Cross?
No, World War II is a milk run war. I spent most of my time tooling at 1,000 feet looking for Japanese submarines, and I found one submarine once, but it turned out to be an American. But we also had missions of bombing the Japanese on bypassed islands, atolls.
How many missions did you fly in the Pacific?
Something more than 100, but.
And you returned to the U.S. in
September 44, and I went to Quantico to learn to be a Marine. We had no Marine training before we went overseas, and we didn't even know how to put on the uniform properly.
So you're back in the U.S. in 44, and you're going to continue your education at that point?
Well, after I was back, they sent me to the West Coast, and I was in a TBF squadron, SB-2C squadron, and I ended up the war flying F-7F night fighters. I had planned to hopefully go to Harvard Business School after Dartmouth, so I applied, and fortunately I was accepted in the first class. and graduated in June 47 and spent the next 5 years with a manufacturing company, which is a small one, which is exactly what I wanted, to see raw materials go in one door and finished products go out the other. But in the meantime, I was continuing to fly weekends with the reserves, and in 1950, fall of 51, my reserve squadron was called up for the Korean War, and we trained at Floyd Bennett Field here in New York for a couple of months. Then we went down to Cherry Point, and everyone except me went to a fighter squadron, and I went to the training squadron to become the operations officer of the training squadron, and I didn't like it. And they said, well, if I didn't, after a month, they would put me in a fighter squadron, but I would get checked out in jets. Well, I got checked out in jets. I loved it, and I became the operations officer of the Jet Transition Squadron.
I understand in that during that time period that you had the occasion to train two celebrities that most people are familiar with.
Yeah, Ted Williams came through, and I knew nothing. I didn't want anything to happen to him, so I gave Ted his first 5 rides in the jet trainer. And he did very well. Then he went up to operational training and then to Korea. John Glenn came through. I didn't pay any attention to him because he hadn't earned a reputation at this point. He also went to the VMF 311 in Korea, where I joined both of them some months later. And we flew about a half a dozen missions together before John went up to the Air Force to fly F-86s with the... And he shot down 3 MiGs before the end of the war. Ted went home after 39 missions. His 40th was flying with me, but he never got off the ground. I have nothing but great respect and admiration for Ted, who gave up a wonderful baseball career twice to serve his country. And as for John Glenn, I don't have enough words to describe my admiration for him. I spoke to him on the telephone about 6 months before he passed on this year. Outstanding human being. He had the right amount of humility, and he made everyone feel that you were important, and we all accepted his leadership. He was a great American.
That's for certain. He certainly was. Tell us a little bit about your family. You have how many children?
Yes, I'm fortunate. I've had 2 children, a daughter and a son, and 2 grandchildren. One just graduated from college and has a wonderful job at a consulting firm, and the other is in his 2nd year at law school.
How long have you lived in this wonderful building we're in?
Well, I moved in here in about 54 years, yes. My son, Josh, was 6 months old when we moved here because he spent his first 6 months in a carriage. We only had a 2-bedroom apartment and we needed a 3.
I see.
And then we moved here.
Let's talk a little bit about your professional career. Obviously, while you may have stayed in the reserves and flew on weekends and from time to time, where did you first gain employment?
Well, when I came back from Korea at the age of 35, I met a beautiful young lady, fell in love, married, and started a 30-year career in the financial community. When she passed on, when I was 68 and she was 57, I retired from finance. My financial work was specialized in mergers and acquisitions, and I had some wonderful clients, such as Helena Rubinstein, CBS, Johnson & Johnson, American Metal, Climax.
I understand you were involved in a pretty significant financial transaction back in the day. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, you have goals in life, and you achieve some of them, but not all of them. and I'd been working for CIT Financial for some 5 years, and I concluded that they should, since the controlling family didn't have any successors, they should merge out with some company that could use their financial muscle. And I proposed the Xerox Corporation, which they accepted, and I initiated the negotiations for Xerox to acquire CIT, and it was announced in the front page of the New York Times, and I was very pleased with that. But unfortunately, 6 weeks later, they canceled the transaction. So this was a goal I didn't accomplish, to conceive and initiate the merger of the first billion-dollar deal. Today they have 10 and 15 and even $20 billion deals.
Well, along with or subsequent to your military career and during your professional career, I think another major change took place in your life. I think you were probably a pretty heavy smoker at one time, and then at age 46, something happened. Tell us about that.
Yes. At 46, I was 15 pounds over my college weight and smoking a pack and a half a day. And my doctor said to me, "John, if you don't stop smoking, you're not likely to live to see any grandchildren." And that reached me, and I threw the pack of cigarettes in the street corner receptacle and never turned back. At the same time, my neighbor invited me to jog with him around the reservoir in Central Park before breakfast, and I enjoyed it. It was 51 years ago. And every morning, almost every morning, weather permitting, I've been going out in Central Park before breakfast. And now I'm back down 2 pounds above my college weight.
So here we find you with beginning to jog around the park, and that led to something even bigger, didn't it?
Well, I saw friends of mine going into the marathon. One day I said, at age 57, I can do that. And so I went and I finished my first marathon with great ecstatic euphoria. It was the first of 16 New York marathons and 2 Marine Corps marathons. And at age 93, I recognized that the all-time oldest finisher was 93, and I could do that too. So I entered it, but at mile 6, I was exhausted, and the next day they discovered I was anemic and I had a transfusion. So at 94, I got halfway, mile 13, and I had back pain, so I had to withdraw, and I took the subway home. The next year, at 95, I got into Manhattan on First Avenue. It's mile 16, but I had leg cramps, and I took a taxi home. The following year, it's 96, I got to the Bronx at mile 20, which is called the Wall, with 6 miles to go. No back pains, no leg pains. I knew I'd finish, and I did. Of course, it took me over 11 hours to do it. It was dark. They stopped the timing clock, but I accomplished a goal to be the all-time oldest finisher of the New York Marathon, as well as the Marine Corps Marathon, which I did at 91.
Well, it's interesting, too, for folks to see your book called 26 Miles at Age 96, with a considerable amount of your life's history in the book.
Well, I put that book together because I now have a new goal, and that is to tell my story to as many young people as possible, to encourage and motivate them to follow my lifestyle in hopes that they can enjoy the longevity I have. You know, life is divided to me in 3 parts. The first 30 years of growing up, learning, establishing a family and children. The second to 60, is your career and finishing, and this third part is retirement. Well, it's very clear that if at age 60 you're 20 or 25 pounds above your college weight, you will not live to the 80s. You'll pass on in the 70s. And people don't recognize that. And they could have they're throwing away 25 or 30 years. I've done a tremendous number of things in those 25, 30 years. You know, I've skied all over the world, more than 80 places.
That's what we want to get into in just a moment. Hi, we're back again with Colonel Jonathan Mendes. We're going to talk a little bit about his skiing experiences and history. He has skied in many, many locations around the world. Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. Well, as I said before, I discovered skiing at 11, and I last skied, pardon me, I last skied at 93 at Vail. But I've skied at roughly 80 locations throughout the world, winter and summer. In the wintertime, obviously around the United States and Canada and Europe and Italy, France, Switzerland. But in the summertime, I'd go to South America, to Chile and Argentina, and also to New Zealand. I skied a half a dozen places in New Zealand, and a glacier skiing where they flew us up to the top of the glacier, and we skied down, and they flew us back up where we had a champagne lunch, and we skied down again.
I didn't know that they did that type of skiing. I thought that was only in modern times that that they flew you to the top of the mountain for skiing and deep powder.
This was a real treat. But skiing has been an important part of my life, and during my growing years with raising a family, I didn't have very much skiing, very little, and it all occurred in the last 30 years.
You had apparently the discretionary time to do this, did you not?
Well, not while I was working, no. And raising a family, there was no skiing whatsoever. Of course, I went skiing on my honeymoon. I wouldn't marry anyone who wouldn't go skiing with me on the honeymoon. We went to Canada, and I put my wife in ski school. And by the end of the first week, she was skiing in the mountain with me.
What about your children? Were they skiing as well?
I've taken my son and my grandsons up to Dartmouth to go skiing, and as a matter of fact, one of my grandsons just came back from a ski trip with his classmates at Boston University Law School.
Let's talk a little bit about your diet. I think we'd be interested in hearing just how much control you place on the types of food and the frequency of eating.
Sure, it's your eating habits are one of the most important, crucial elements in leading a long life. I eat essentially fresh vegetables and fruits, chicken and fish. Very little meats and sweets, and everything in moderation. Very little. You have to eat in moderation. No binges. To eat in moderation. There's nothing wrong with going off your diet occasionally, but you have to control it and keep your weight as close as possible to your college weight in order to enjoy longevity.
You mentioned college weight. For those of us who may not have attended college, I guess we have to go back to our high school weight, do we not? When you left the military, I think it might be interesting for the audience, the viewers, to know about the transition that you had to make. You know, today, it's a very difficult situation for people who are making the transition from military life, particularly those who have spent some time in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places around the globe, and they return home with facing a lot of difficulties psychologically and, of course, physically. Do you see any parallel, or is there any parallel to when you made the transition from military to civilian? Did you face the same kind of situation then?
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I can tell you this. My transition from military life to civilian was a piece of cake. I made up my mind I was not going to have any problems. I was going to go right to work. I came out in October of 45, and I immediately got a job in a department store for the Christmas season. And I went to work. I had no transition. I had no bad memories of combat, for one thing. I was fortunate. The only time I saw death and destruction was when I landed a week after the Marines had gotten across Engebi Island in Eniwetok Atoll, and the dead bodies were still there and floating in the lagoon, and they'd bomb us at night. But that's the only my exposure to the death and destruction.
What advice do you think you might have for the young men making that transition today from the battlefield back into civilian life? Any particular advice you can offer?
Yes. Go to work right away. Get your mind on something else. Make the transition. I did. When the Christmas season was over, I put my skis in my station wagon and headed for Canada. And I skied up there until I drove down to Boston to start classes at Harvard Business School. So I kept busy. There was no difficulty whatsoever in transition.
What, today we call it PTSD. For those that are having difficulty transitioning back into civilian life. Did you see any of that from the fellows that were leaving the military in World War II in Korea?
Not at all. I came back. I went to work, as I said, at Harvard Business School. All achievers, high achievers in this first class. And they had no symptoms of any problems from the war.
I see.
That I observed, at any rate.
Well, I think other than what we've covered, I believe that we've completed our mission here, and we've learned a tremendous amount about your most interesting life. And I'd like to thank you very much for submitting yourself to this interview. And we look forward to seeing you at one of our regular luncheons during the course of this year. And I'm Don Shule for the Naval Order of the United States.
Well, I'd like to say I appreciate this opportunity to speak, and I hope my story will motivate, encourage young people to lead more active and healthy lives so that they too can enjoy the longevity that the good Lord has given to me.
Thank you once again, Jonathan.